Today's video, homework video number 4, is on the judicial branch and linkage institutions. There are 4 different linkage institutions. The first one are interest groups. Remember, those are groups and organizations that are interested in trying to change policy but do not run political candidates for office. There's, of course, the media, political parties, and elections. Now, these are the places and times where these linkage institutions can link people to the judicial process. The first is in the appointment process for judges. Of course, the president will nominate and then confirmation, and both of those times are where linkage institutions can get involved. Deciding cases, what gets heard and focused on, could be linkage institutions could get involved with that, in the case itself and in the final decision. And then at the back end of enforcement with the president primarily. So first, how linkage institutions can get involved in the judicial appointment process. Now the appointment process starts with what we call senatorial courtesy. This is for lower federal courts only. Then the president nominates the judges and the Senate has to confirm. Now, based on my descriptions, which I'm going to say out loud, please write how each of these groups can influence this process. We'll start with interest groups. When it comes to senatorial courtesy, what this is that the president asks the senators from the state where the district court is located to provide a list of potential nominees. Interest groups could lobby senators to make sure that people that they like, that are friendly to them, are on that list. And especially, like if, for example, you're the National Rifle Association, you may lobby your senator to make sure that a pro-gun judge is the person who they put on that list. So interest groups can definitely go after senators the way they would. They can lobby, they can protest, they can use grassroots activism, anything they can do to get the word out to that senator to get the judges they want. And of course, they could campaign an electioneering where they get involved in the senator election. Then, interest groups can get involved in the presidential nominations with the same thing. They can lobby the president and the president's people to make sure that the president is picking someone that these interest groups like. Lastly, in the Senate confirmation process, again, interest groups can get involved through lobbying, through protests, through trying to get a chance to testify at a hearing about this person. They can try to attract the attention of the media. They can do anything they can to either get the person confirmed and get the pro vote, the yes vote, or to try to shut it down because they don't like the person and what they think they'll do when they get the job. Now, the media and the interest groups work closely together. Interest groups are constantly trying to get the attention of the media so they can get what they want. So, of course, the media acts as the gatekeeper and also can decide on whether it's going to be positive or negative stories that get told about this person. So they can kind of set the agenda in that way. And if it's very controversial, if they make a controversy out of it, that of course makes it harder a lot of times for this person to get the job. If the media ignores the issue, then they're usually going to sail on through and just get the job. But if the media wants to stir up a controversy, if they dig up dirt on the nominated judge to try to shut it down, then that could shut down. Political parties, of course, are the people who are the senators and the presidential parties. So Democrats are going to try to get liberal judges nominated and confirmed, while Republicans are trying to get conservative judges nominated and confirmed. Currently, the president and the Senate are both controlled by Democrats, so it's a little bit easier for them to make sure it's just liberals all the way through. But if the president were a Republican and the senator were Democrats, then political parties would have to negotiate to get a nominee who both sides can agree on. And then, of course, elections and political parties go hand in hand because political parties, they care about elections. And if a judge gets nominated who's very unpopular, then your election might be in jeopardy. So you might have to think about what's going to happen in an election. And of course, interest groups who contribute a lot of money to senators and presidential candidates in elections, they may threaten that money if it doesn't go the way they want, either for or against that person. So in the nomination process, politics plays out, and these linkage institutions are playing a big role in deciding who gets nominated and who eventually gets the job. Now for the judicial decision-making process. The first step is just getting into court. Now, interest groups play a huge role here because they could sue the government. They could create the court case that the judicial branch eventually hears. There are several key groups that do a lot of this. The American Civil Liberties Union sues the government all the time about protecting our Bill of Rights. So if ever your rights are violated by the government, the ACLU will sue. Of course, the National Rifle Association protects the Second Amendment. So anytime they think the Second Amendment is being violated, they sue the government. The NAACP, they protect the rights of colored people, right, in terms of equal opportunity. So they go after the 14th Amendment, so they sue the government when the 14th Amendment is being violated. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce deals with business, and so they're suing the government all the time because the Commerce Clause in the Constitution allows all these regulations of businesses, and they want to make sure that these rules are enacted fairly and not going too far. And they're very pro-business. So all these groups can and do sue the government all the time. They all have huge staffs of lawyers whose job it is to sue, which is of course influencing the cases that courts hear, because you need someone to sue if the government's going to hear, if the judicial branch is going to hear the case. At the same time, interest groups and political parties can rally around certain issues and cases. So they could have protests, they could be calling into political groups, and then of course trying to get the media attention. So the media could then report on those cases and issues to get them national attention. The more national attention a case can get in a district or appellate court, it makes the Supreme Court more likely to pay attention to that case. You can recall, there's over 54,000 cases heard at the district level, about half that at the appellate level, and then the Supreme Court only hears 70 or 80 cases a year. You better have some media attention if you want your case to make it all the way up to the Supreme Court, which means you're going to have to do a lot of rallying, you have to get a lot of attention, so that your case is more likely to get heard. Because very few, less than 1%, make it to the Supreme Court every year. Now there's a lot of issues where we can see political parties coming into play. Conservative courts are about states' rights, anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, anti-big government, anti-drugs, pro-war policies, and anti-affirmative action. And they're going to go after and sue in these regards. Liberal, pro-federal government, pro-choice, pro-gay marriage, pro-gay government, anti-war on drugs, anti-war policies, and tend to be pro-affirmative action, so they go after these cases and try to push them through to make it their way. All right. It's not necessary to write all these down. Deciding the case. When the Supreme Court is thinking about what cases to actually take and decide, they have to think about a few things. They have to think about the law and the Constitution, and then they really have to think about how the case will affect the future. They only take 70 to 80 cases for a reason, because their cases decide all the cases that are similar. So they have to think about the immediate effects, what that's going to do for the Supreme Court in terms of its power with the other two branches, and of course long-term policy in America. They have to decide, how is this going to change the American landscape? Right now what we can see is the federal courts have decided they're not going to stand on the wrong side of history, and they're going to promote equality when it comes to marriage instead of promoting discrimination, because they've had a history of promoting discrimination where they heard cases where they allowed states to make laws banning the marriage between African Americans and whites, and that didn't look well for them in history, and they're not going to make the same mistake again, probably. Now, interest groups can lobby the court. They do this through an amicus brief. This is a written brief submitted by parties not directly involved in the case. With these briefs, they can tell the court their legal position, so what they believe the law says and what they believe previous cases have said. They can provide strong arguments on the issues which justices could use in their official decisions. And it's frankly a popularity contest. Show which side has the most support. So you try to get more briefs on your side. The more legal briefs that you can file that are well written and well researched and have a lot of public support, possibly the more likely it is that the Supreme Court will at least notice your position. They don't have to decide, though, based on popularity. They decide supposedly based on the law and the Constitution only, not on politics. But amicus briefs can be submitted by anyone. Then there's oral arguments. Now, oral arguments are only between the two parties of the case, but interest groups can still get involved. And this is usually through protesting. So they're going to show up at the Supreme Court the day that the case is being heard, with signs, with rallies, trying to get the word out to, of course, get media attention. They're trying to show the court that your side is the one that should win. They're trying to make that argument. So if the court pays attention and thinks, how will we look to the public? If we make a very publicly unpopular decision, that could be really bad for the court and its power, because you could potentially elect people to government who say, screw the Supreme Court, we're not doing anything they say. The last slide here is about enforcement. Sorry, second to last. Then we have your questions. Now, interest groups here can protest, lobby, and do any form of grassroots activism and electioneering to make sure that the ruling is being enforced if they like it. Again, their goal is always to get media attention. If a ruling is being ignored, that they wanted to be enforced, then they want to make sure they point that out to the media so somebody gets mad. And of course, you can always sue again if you have to. So if the Supreme Court has made a ruling saying you need to desegregate schools, and the schools don't get desegregated, everything just stays the same, you could potentially sue again using the same ruling as justification. All right, closing questions. 1, write a summary of how each linkage institution can try to influence the court. 2, which strategy do you think is the most effective? Explain your response. And 3, which linkage institution do you think is the most effective at getting what it wants? And again, explain your response. All right, thanks guys.